Sheriff's detectives secured a court order authorizing the interception and monitoring of Paul Flores' cell phone and text messages. This is one of many things that have been done over the last 10 years. In February of 2020, detectives served search warrants at the home of Paul Flores, as well as his sister, mother, and father, all simultaneously last year. Physical evidence recovered during these searches led to the service of additional search warrant at Paul Flores' residence in April of last year. During the search warrant, detectives recovered evidence related to the murder of Kristin Smart. In March of this year, detectives served another search warrant in Arroyo Grande at the home of Ruben Flores, the father of Paul Flores. Additional evidence related to the Smart investigation was discovered at that time. So as a result of this evidence, a San Luis Obispo Superior Court judge signed 2 arrest warrants and 2 additional search warrants. At approximately 07:30 this morning, today, both were arrested simultaneously with a team down in San Pedro, California, and a team in Arroyo Grande, California. And they arrested Paul Flores and his father, Ruben. Paul was arrested for charge of murder with 0 bail, meaning he is unable to bail, and Ruben Flores was arrested as an accessory to murder with a bail of $250,000.
Richard, investigators actually searched Ruben Flores, or Paul Flores' dad's house in 1996. It wouldn't be until about 8 months later that they searched this house for the first time. Authorities first searched the Branch Street house on March 3, 1997. This search reportedly came at the request of James Murphy, the attorney who represents Kristin's parents, Stan and Denise Smart. The next search would happen 3 years later on June 19, 2000.
If it is your position that Mr. Flores is not going to answer questions about his employment, his matriculation into Cal Poly, who his friends are, his relationship with his family members, things that occurred in his life prior to the date of the disappearance of Kristin Smart, vehicles that were available to him to use, things of that sort, perhaps I can cut to the chase and simply make a record as to the types of questions that I would be asked, and we can just have the blanket invocation. I get your position on that on the record, so when I go to a reviewing court, I have a clear and fair record.
As I indicated, he plans to answer that he will invoke the Fifth Amendment on all your questions. If you have questions to direct to my client, go ahead and ask questions. Save the speeches for later. Just ask the questions.
Okay, well, Mr. Delamont, it's not a speech. It's a civil proceeding.
If you're not going to ask questions, we'll discontinue the deposition and leave. You're here to take a deposition. If you want to ask questions, go ahead.
I'm going to make a record of my position in this case, Mr. Delamont.
You can make the record some other time. Ask the questions. That's what a deposition is for. Okay. Not to make a speech. You can make a speech to the court. You can do it in writing. You can do it orally. Ask the questions. We're here to answer the questions. We're required to do so. Ask the questions or we'll leave.
All right. I'm going to make my record here. I've been advised that he's not going to answer the questions, so let's start asking the questions. Did you report your '85 Nissan truck stolen in San Diego recently?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
In May of '96, were you a student at Cal Poly?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Please provide me with the employment positions that you have held since you started high school.
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Are you presently employed?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Where do you presently reside?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Where did you attend high school?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
What is the name of your father?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
What is your mother's name?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
What is your sister's name?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Does your mother have a sister?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Prior to moving to the Arroyo Grande area, where did you reside?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Were you employed at Garland's in Grover Beach at any time in your life?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Have you ever been employed at a Union 76 station in the San Luis Obispo County area?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
What is the name of your supervisor? Strike that. What was the name of your supervisor at Garland's?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
What were the nature of your job duties at Garland's?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Did you cook hamburgers at Garland's?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
How old are you?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
In what year did you leave your... Strike that. In what year did you cease being a student at Cal Poly?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Could you provide me with the names of the persons with whom you have discussed the Kristin Smart case?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Were you arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol in 1996?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Did you attend a party at or near the Cal Poly campus in May of 1996?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Can you provide me with the names of persons who were present at the party in May of 1996, the party that immediately preceded the disappearance of Kristin Smart?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
I think that I have made a sufficient record that the witness is not going to answer any questions in connection with anything other than his name. I have been advised by Mr. Delamotte at the start of the deposition that the witness would not be answering any questions other than his name. The witness, on advice of counsel, is refusing to answer any and all questions. I have approximately 1,000 additional questions, but having had no success in finding out whether or not he cooked hamburgers at Garland's, I'm going to cease the questioning. I believe I've made a sufficient record to go to a court and seek appropriate relief. I want the record clear that I will be seeking sanctions from Mr. Delamotte, from his law firm, and from Mr. Flores as a result of what I believe to be a bad faith presentation of this witness and a wrongful assertion of the Fifth Amendment. At this time, I would propose the following stipulation: that the court reporter will prepare the original deposition and forward it to either Mr. Delamotte or Mr. Coates. To Mr. Delamotte. Mr. Delamotte will provide the deposition transcript to Mr. Flores. That Mr. Flores will have an opportunity to review his deposition, make any changes. That at the conclusion of the process of review of the deposition, Mr. Flores will be given an opportunity to make any changes he wishes to make. My office will be advised of the changes within 30 days of the making of those changes. That in the event the witness does not sign the deposition transcript under penalty of perjury, a copy, an unsigned copy, could be used with the same force and effect as a signed copy. That the reporter would be relieved of her duties under the code. Do I have a stipulation?
So agreed.
I think that concludes the deposition.
I agree to that.
Who would like a copy?
We are going off record now at 11:22.
Could we go back on record? Mr. Delamotte, may I just
Going
have
on
one more
now.
second of your time so I can complete the record? Mr. Delamotte has before him a file of materials which I have no idea whether or not Mr. Flores did or did not review those documents. I simply want the record to reflect that he does have a file here. The only document that I saw Mr. Flores look at in my presence was the admonition which is attached. Thank you.
Anything to say?
This time, the Smarts are still pointing the finger at you. Do you have anything that you want to say that you think the public should understand about your position and why you haven't spoken out?
In this search, sheriff's deputies used a ground-penetrating radar system to get electromagnetic pictures of where objects may be buried. Then 7 years would go by when on May 22, 2007, a private construction company dug behind the Flores home as part of discovery for a civil case arranged by the Smarts family attorney. Wednesday's search is reportedly the first time investigators have searched the Flores home in close to 13 years. It's still unclear at this time what was taken from the home. Susan Flores so far says no comment. Now, we asked the San Luis Obispo County Courthouse for a copy of that original search warrant from 1997, and they say so far all of the documents from this case are still sealed.
How do we know that everything that you've told us so far isn't really the truth? How do we know now that you lied for us?
Well, that wasn't important though.
Sure is. That's important.
Smart was last seen on May 25, 1996, after returning to campus from a fraternity party in San Luis Obispo. Witnesses said Flores was the last person to be seen with her.
Since San Luis Obispo County Sheriff Ian Parkinson took office more than a decade ago, investigators have collected more than 140 new items of evidence, conducted physical evidence searches at 9 separate locations, served 18 search warrants, resubmitted 37 pieces of evidence from the early days of the investigation, and conducted more than 90 person-to-person interviews.
Searches conducted on 4 legs and 3 wheels Monday at the home of Ruben Flores in connection to the 1996 disappearance of Cal Poly student Kristin Smart. Cadaver dogs from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office alerted to the door of a 1985 Volkswagen Cabriolet last registered to Ruben and Susan Flores. For cadaver dog trainer and former Border Patrol officer Roy Lopez, he says even after years have gone by, cadaver dogs can still pick up a scent. Cadaver dogs were used previously in the case back in 1996 at Cal Poly. At that time, dogs alerted to items inside the dorm room Paul Flores was living in when Kristin Smart disappeared, according to investigators. investigators also used ground-penetrating radar Monday. Matthew Wolf, president of Impulse Radar, says people will often use the device in a grid pattern searching for inconsistencies in the soil.
You have soil layers and they look contiguous, and all of a sudden you dig a pit and backfill it, it will never reorient itself to what the native soil looks like.
With shovels in hand, investigators dug underneath Ruben Flores' Arroyo Grande home and at specific locations in the backyard. These areas were extensively searched with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar Monday and Tuesday. Crews also moved this blue pop-up tent to another section of the backyard, where they dug for about an hour. Thick foliage around the property made it difficult to see the activity. By 2 p.m., yellow tape around the Flores' home was taken down, the Flores family returning just 30 minutes later.
I just hope they find her soon.
Sheriff's officials are not releasing any further details about what evidence, if any, was found here.
A San Luis Obispo Superior Court judge signed 2 arrest warrants and 2 additional search warrants. At approximately 07:30 this morning, today, both were arrested simultaneously with a team down in San Pedro, California, and a team in Arroyo Grande, California, and they arrested Paul Flores and his father, Ruben. Paul was arrested for charge of murder with 0 bail, meaning he is unable to bail, and Ruben Flores was arrested as an accessory to murder with a bail of $250,000. We are still currently in the process of executing those search warrants. Could be there for the remainder of the day or even into tomorrow, depending on what they find.